there, I'm Connie Foote with Foote Title Group, where we protect your home ownership. Welcome to Coffee with Connie. Wow, it looks a little dark and shadowy today. Let's try this. Let's see how that works. Hopefully that helps a little bit. Thank you so much for your time and tuning in this morning. I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about the closing or the settlement. What do all these terms mean, and what's going to happen when I go to closing or settlement? We say closing in our office because settlement sounds so stark and so intense, and the process should not be that. Yes, there's some very serious things that you're doing, but it should be a fun, interesting, exciting experience. And so we want you to be able to feel comfortable asking questions, looking for information, making sure you understand what's going on in a very comfortable and easygoing setting, so that you have all the information you need, because this is all about you. Whether you're buying or you're selling a piece of property, this is all about you and making sure that you understand what's going on and that all the pieces get buttoned up. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about that today, because I don't talk about that very often, and I wanted to make sure that this is an area, obviously, that I do have a lot of expertise in, and I wanted to make sure that I open this up for a lot of questions and make sure that I'm answering things that you need to know. A lot of people are looking at and potentially purchasing new properties. I hear all the time that the real estate market is just really busy and very competitive. So obviously this is something that you're probably going to come across soon. Whether you're buying a house or you're selling a house or a piece of property, this is something that's going to be coming up. So I wanted to take a few minutes and talk about this with you, and feel free to check in and let me know that you're on so I can say hi. Hey there, Bob Hall. How are you this morning? Happy late birthday. Hope you're having a great week. So check in. Let me know that you're on. Ask questions if you have them. I love to be able to answer those questions. Hey there, Mark. How are you? So this morning, as I said, we're going to talk a little bit about closing, settlement. What does all that mean? When you sign a contract to buy or sell a piece of property, one of the things they ask you is, do you have a place that you want to go to closing? Because they need to fill that into the contract. So first, let me say you have the right to choose where you go to closing. And most people don't understand that. And it does matter, because there's a lot of serious things that go into it. But let's just talk about the process and what happens leading up to closing and actually at the closing table. So that if you're a first time, or even if you've done it before, sometimes you may have different experiences. And so this is a take on my understanding and the way that we actually do things. So when we first get your real estate contract from your realtor or your lender, we go through that contract and make sure we understand all the different parts of the agreement, because there's a lot of pieces to it. So what's the property that you're purchasing? Who are the people that are selling the property? Who are the buyers? Do I understand, and do we have all of those people on board? Make sure that the property is the property that you thought it was going to be. Is there any other agreements? Is there going to be a home warranty? Do we need to do a termite inspection? Is the property subject to being serviced by a well system or a septic system? And if so, do we need to do some certifications for that? So we start examining that contract and make sure that we understand all of the agreements between the buyer and the seller, because this is ultimately your agreement between the buyer and the seller, whether you're on the sales side or on the buyer side. So this is what's going to tell everyone else what you want to happen through this transaction. So that's what we do first, is examine all that. Then we actually go through and we order a title search. And a title search is actually a search of the land records that actually designates through the ownership what's happened. So who owned the property? Did they have a mortgage on it? Did they owe any money to anyone? Did they give any pieces of their property away to anyone else while they were while it was in their ownership? What happened through each ownership? And we call that a chain of title. And the title is the actual pulling together of all of the information about that property. Hey there, Miss Karen. How are you this morning? Thanks for tuning in. So the title is, when somebody says that, that's the actual paperwork that we receive from the company that is in the land records that does that search, and they're actually searching all of the information about that property, who owned it and what happened during their ownership. So that's called the chain, because it's the chain of each of the owners and what happened. So then we get that title search and we actually compare that and review that with what we were told about in the contract. So who is the purchaser? Do they have any liens or judgments against them? Do they owe IRS or the local state tax collector, or do they have a judgment against them? And is it going to affect this ownership? So we need to look at that and talk about that. Do the sellers have any liens, judgments? Do they owe anything to anyone other than what we know about? Because when we first get the information, we also get a checklist that tells us all the contact information for everybody, who the seller has loans with that may need to be paid off. Does the buyer have any extenuating circumstances? Does the seller have any circumstances we need to address? All of those pieces, and who all the parties are involved. So we're now comparing the contract, the title, and all of that information we were given to make sure it all is what we think it is. Because you have to remember, we don't have the luxury of being able to talk to everybody before they come to closing. Typically, in most cases, we don't get to sit down to say, all right, well, let's make sure you understand and we understand what all is going to happen here. So we're trying to compare all of this information, and it's overlaid over top of each other. So we're looking at the title, we're looking at the contract, we're looking at all of this contact information just to make sure we haven't missed any pieces or there's something we don't know about. So we're doing all of that. And if we have questions, maybe one of the sellers that's in the chain of ownership hasn't signed the contract. So now we've got to address that. So why isn't that person signed the document? Are we doing a power of attorney? Have they passed away? Did somebody just not realize they were on the ownership? So how do we address that? Is one of the buyers who are going to be buying the property, they didn't sign the contract, or maybe there's a power of attorney that we're going to need to do. So all of these things we're sort of weeding through, a little bit of investigative work, so we can make sure that we're protecting the ownership of the new buyer and that the seller is all taken care of and buttoned up as well, so when they walk away, everything's taken care of. So that's the title search part of it. And then when we run into some of those things, let's say there's a loan that the seller had that wasn't properly taken care of previously somewhere in their ownership. Maybe they refinanced. Those are things that we're going to have to address as well. So as the title company, before we can get you to closing, we've got to make sure that that title is clear and all of those ownership questions are resolved. So when the new purchaser takes ownership, number one, the ownership is a good ownership and they're not going to have any problem, but also because we're protecting that ownership and we want to make sure everything's right in line in the way it's supposed to be. So sometimes we have to do some of those behind the scene things, fix some of that stuff, do some research, do some legwork to repair some of these things that may be dangling out there that could affect ownership later. We want to make sure that doesn't happen for both the seller and the buyer. The seller walks away and they've gotten their check and they're ready to be moving on. They don't need a phone call from us or another title company or the buyer saying, hey, I had somebody knock on my door and said that we had this mortgage that had to be paid off. So that's one of the pieces that we wrap up too as we're going through the title. So all of that beforehand. Then we're working on ordering certification. So if that contract that we talked about, your agreement, says that the property is serviced by a water and a septic system, then we may need to order that certification and make sure that's clear. Hey there, Jamie. How are you? Nice to see you. Hey, Billy. Good to see you. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. So we may need to order some of those certifications. Maybe there's a termite inspection. That may have been ordered through the real estate agents or through the home inspection, but sometimes those are some things that we need to do. We need to get those certifications back in, and we need to make sure that everything's okay. So we need a little bit of time to make sure that if we have to order a termite inspection, that it doesn't come back and say the house has some termites that need to be exterminated, and maybe some repair needs to be done. Or if the water system maybe has some kind of an issue that came up on the certification or on the inspection that needs to be addressed. So there needs to be a little bit of time in there. So when someone asks us from when we get the paperwork at first, how long does it take before we get to closing? It depends on the jurisdiction, and it also depends on the requirements that we need to take care of, because we need some time to make sure some of these things get resolved if that's the case. We don't want to be the reason to hold up closing, and typically that would only happen if something weird came up in the title that we weren't expecting that we need to get resolved for them. So we'll order all those certifications, and then we work with the lender and we say, all right, now we're going to make sure that all of our numbers are in the right place, that you understand what all of the agreements were, you understand what's in the title, the things that we can disclose to you. We're all looking at the contract, the mortgage lender is, the realtors are, we are, everybody's looking at all of that information to make sure when you come to closing, what our job is to compile all of that information, all of those numbers, and pull those all together. So when we get to closing, everybody's looking at one document with all of the costs on it. All of the costs, all of the credits, all of the agreements are in there and done correctly. So we work with the lender very closely, and anymore, we actually now don't prepare that document. We used to, but we now don't prepare that document. We provide the lender with all the information that we have, and they prepare it, but we work side by side to make sure that neither one of us are missing something. There isn't something out there that we didn't know about, we didn't understand properly in that contract, those kind of things. So we're collaborating together between the lender and the realtors to make sure that the realtors don't see anything that maybe we didn't understand in the contract, because they were actually part of writing that agreement, and they understand the interests of the buyer and the seller better than anyone. So, hey Katrina, good morning. Thanks so much for tuning in. Hi Gerald, how are you today? Good to see you. Thanks for tuning in. So we're coordinating all of those pieces. One of our big jobs is to be the coordinator. We're doing some investigative work to make sure that when we transfer that ownership, it's good and valid and very well taken care of, so that we can insure it and protect you. But also, we are the coordinator. We pull all of these pieces together to make sure when you come to closing, whether you're buying or selling, and you come to the table, everything has already been organized and coordinated. So the other job we have is we got to make sure that everybody can come in at the same time, work in everybody's schedule, make sure that when everybody's ready to come in, the loan's ready, and we have to coordinate getting all the loan paperwork from that mortgage company to make sure that we get everything sitting there at the table so it's all ready for you to sign. Because what's probably the most uncomfortable thing for you is to get to the table and something isn't right, or something isn't all the paperwork isn't actually there. Hey there, Miss Pandora. How are you this morning? Hey, Paulette. Good to see you. Thanks for tuning in, guys. So when you, one of our jobs is to coordinate everybody and make sure it all comes together very seamlessly, because how frustrating is that if all the pieces aren't right and aren't all together when you are ready to come to closing. So the lender tells us the loan's approved. Now we're finalizing everything and making sure we have all the pieces. The lender's sending us the paperwork that needs to be signed at the closing table, and we're reviewing it to make sure that we understand everything that they want explained, and then also that they've got all the pieces that they need to prepare that paperwork and make sure that paperwork's right as well. Then somebody tells you, all right, it's time to come to closing. So you're actually coming to the closing table, and you show up wherever that happens to be. It used to be very traditional that it was actually at our office or at the closing office. Now it happens everywhere, and honestly, more often than not, it actually happens at other locations. Maybe at your realtor's office, maybe at your house, maybe at a restaurant. Not exactly the most preferable place, only because it's noisy, and this is kind of serious, some information that you need to know. But whatever works for you happens more often than not in most cases, and we travel all over the place to take care of closings for people in Maryland and Virginia. So the closing is set, everybody gets together and sits down and reviews all the documents. Now, when you sit at the closing table, it can be a little overwhelming because you're sitting at a table with all these other people, but it's everybody in the transaction, and a lot of information is going around. So the closer, the title agent, the licensed title agent, or the closer, whatever you want to call them, is the person who's going to explain all of that paperwork, and they're going to go through paperwork the seller needs to sign, they're going to go through paperwork the buyer needs to sign. And the one thing I will tell you is, if there's something you don't understand or you feel uncomfortable about, ask the question. It doesn't matter that there's 6 or 8 or 4 or 10 people at that table. This is your time to ask questions. Don't be afraid to say, I just don't get what you're saying. Because if you wait and walk away from the closing table, and in Maryland particularly, we're dispersing all of the money at the table because that's how it actually traditionally happens, and you have a question and something didn't seem right, it's much harder to fix after everybody walks away. And in Virginia, we're actually recording the documents immediately before we disperse the funds. But again, if you have a question and something just doesn't sit right with you, maybe you don't feel comfortable sitting there with everybody asking the question, ask to be excused. That's okay too. just don't be afraid to use the resources that are at the table. Your realtor's there, a lot of times your lender's there, the person that's doing your closing, me, other licensed closers. We want you to ask questions and we want to help you make sure you understand. Because you may know things that we don't know, and it may be something that should or could change the documentation or the numbers or the funds that are being transferred. So your question may be very important to the process, so don't be afraid. So at closing, we're going to go through all the paperwork. Everybody's going to sign everything. We're going to notarize everything, proving that we did verify that you are the people that are supposed to be signing the documents. We'll need your government issue ID to be able to do that. And I say government issue ID because a lot of people try to give us a lot of things that aren't things that we can use to validate who's there. So validating that person that's at closing, we go copy everything for you. So before you leave, you will have executed documentation of what you closed. Now some, and we are one of them, some closing companies actually upload your documents into the cloud and give you access to them. And that way you can actually get to your documents digitally from anywhere. But some people like them, the traditional paperwork in their hand, absolutely fine. A lot of people don't ever open it again. And so the cloud is a great place to have storage, protection. You can easily find those documents. And so a lot of places do that. So we'll copy the IDs, copy that information, scan it all in, get it back to you. Write everybody's checks. In Maryland, we do the checks at the table. In Virginia, we have to do them after closing. It's the law and the way that the properties are transferred. And then you're transferring keys, and it's yours. So closing is not meant to be overwhelming or confusing. There's a lot that goes on. It's only about an hour process, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more, depending on your situation, but typically an hour is allotted for it. So there's a lot that goes on there. So don't be afraid to ask questions because you may not understand something that's being talked about. So that was a lot of information, but hopefully it helped you guys understand a little bit more about the process. Thank you, Billy. I really appreciate that. Hey, Katrina, thank you very much. Well, the one thing I want to say to you is I want you to ask questions. If you don't understand, people say, oh, well, we're going to go to settlement, and what does that mean? And hopefully I helped you a little bit understand that process and what goes on behind the scenes and what happens the day that you're actually there. But if for some reason any little question you have or something you didn't understand that I talked about, or maybe it's for a different question that doesn't have anything to do with closing, but has to do with something else about the process, I love helping you answer those questions. So please feel free to reach out to me, reach out to any of our team members, message me, reach out through our website. All of our emails are on there. Hopefully that there was something in there that helped you, but we'd love to help you if there's more information you need. Thank you, Jamie. That means a lot. I appreciate it. Thanks, Pandora. I really appreciate your time, and thanks for tuning in. So one thing I did want to point out, as I've said to you, we have a lot of content that we're putting out every month, and right this month is our 10 most frequently asked questions about closing. It's on our website under new feature right on the front page. It's going out through email. It's on our social media. It's it's all over the place. But if you don't have it there, let me know. I'll send you the link so you can download it. The other huge thing is we have an event that we started last year. This is our second year. If you're new to the King George or Westmoreland community, we have a Make Yourself at Home event that's going to be May 6th. It just went live on social media yesterday, so you can register for it. It's going to be at the King George YMCA. It's free. There are going to be vendors, I don't even know how many. I think we have 10 or 15 vendors, which are different service providers in that community. Police Department, Fire Department, Animal Rescue League, Rails to Trails, Parks and Recs, the Girl Scouts, the Boy Scouts. So if you're new to that community or you just want to come check it out, come down and see us. There's going to be snacks. It's from 10 to noon on May 6th. So get on the schedule and come out and check us out and get to meet all of the community customer service community leaders that might be able to help you in that community. So hopefully that helps you guys out. And I love talking to you guys. I look forward to talking to you again soon. I hope you have an amazing Thursday. I'm Connie Foote with Foote Title Group, where we protect your home ownership. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.